Hi, and welcome to the Hunt for Excellence. This is another podcast brought to you by Huntsinger. And as a reminder, I'm Aaron Wootton. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Huntsinger. And today I've got Paul Zieske with me today. Paul, we met back probably around 2015, 16 while we both worked for Henry Ford.
We did.
I was coming into the organization from Allegiance Health, where I was a CIO, and you were doing some great things, really interesting things around location services. But I'll turn it over to you to give a little bit more color around your career and what you've been working on.
Yeah, maybe we'll even tie it into allegiance. So it, it's relevant to go back a ways. I started my career in air traffic control, first with Westinghouse and then the FAA. And I was a hardware guy. I was an electrical engineer. I got interested in software with the internet. Done some pretty amazing projects back in the 90s, right? And helped with the digitization of and getting brands on the internet after I left the FAA. I really got interested in the internet technologies, and then it kind of went through the dot bomb, right? And had to find a kind of a new direction off of that, with the change in the market, and found my way into healthcare. And now I'm in software. And it was interesting because I really felt comfortable in healthcare because it had the same safety and quality tones that you get from that you would see in aviation and air traffic control, right? The discipline felt comfortable to me. So and again, having gone through the kind of chasing projects, I was always the guy that loved the promise of new technologies. And so I knew that along the way I wanted to build something, and at Henry Ford, we got connected with Apple when they were first releasing a product they called Apple Indoor Positioning, so that you could track the location of mobile devices very accurately, like within a couple meters, and you could get a floor back, and you could put it on a digital map like a GIS map. And so at Allegiance, we were with this product, we were able to take the floor plan for Allegiance and all the floors for Allegiance, and create this, indoor GPS system that allowed them to be able to track patient transporters, right? And this was rolled out throughout the health systems, throughout the other hospitals at Henry Ford. So working with Henry Ford Innovation Institute, we commercialized that and brought a product to market. The thing and you'll know this as well as anybody because you have been on both sides, right? The market awareness is really kind of the key to getting something like that to kind of get that escape velocity. So that was a bit of a struggle with the concept of having to expand the use of these mobile devices, and location-based services had not, maybe let's say they weren't quite ready for that. So anyway, so I saw it was extremely important to kind of educate around this concept. And so when you think about what we were doing, we had this, you kind of visualize a radar system. You had Epic on one side for patient transport, and then you had this visual representation of the location of these transporters on the other side. It really, it dawned on me, we created this kind of concept of care traffic control, right? So and it's fledgling, it's raw, so, and again, how are you going to get that awareness out there? So we think we did the nav thing for like 7 years, and I saw the promise in this idea of care traffic control, and really decided to branch off and focus on that. And that started the Where Matters brand, right? The Why Where Matters brand. So around that, we've been doing we've been doing some newsletters, obviously, and then the podcasting and trying to get the awareness. But also during that time, in a concept like this, it really needs some sort of canon, right? It needs some sort of memorialization. So I worked on a book, and the book is called Where Matters, and its tagline the tagline is healthcare's playbook for location-based services 2.0 and AI. And I think hopefully we'll touch on a little bit of all what's packed into that as well, right? And so in the book, And you know what? Let's just start there because I thought it'd be interesting. We talked a little bit about this, I think, previously. What do you think of when you hear care traffic control?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with all the news today and your
Yeah,
progression into healthcare, around air traffic control.
yeah,
Um, I think of a lot of doctors running around, a lot of clinicians running around. I shouldn't just limit it to doctors and bumping into each other, with
yeah.
and people
Wow.
dying. But
Yeah,
I think that's the connotation of some of the news today with air traffic control and what's been going wrong in the country. Um,
right.
what normally goes right is a system, of uh, resources going in and out, and it's managing the operations of an entire hospital.
Right.
Would be the connotation of the language. Where did you first hear that term?
Well, so again, I love to say that I thought of it, right? But when we did, I sent out an email to the team. I said, "Geez, we're really doing this. This looks like care traffic control," and everybody says, that's great." So we started looking into where it came from, and actually, Dr. John Halamka coined it in 2015 on Fox Business News. Just and what it was the reason why I asked this is because it's popped up in a couple different directions, and the way that he was looking at it, when you think of 2015, wearables were kind of coming onto the scene. Mobile was going pretty fast, right? He had this idea of the quantified self, perhaps, right? And where the wearables would allow you to be able to send information off to perhaps a server, right? So his vision for this was that as these systems get more sophisticated and you're able to capture more high fidelity health information from a patient in a remote location, that you could have a sort of command center that would work directly with the patient, and they could help, most certainly the preventative side would be the best case scenario, but also, monitoring patients, keeping them, out of the hospital until absolutely necessary. So that was kind of his vision of that. Then we looked around again, and teletracking had, they actually trademarked the term care traffic control certified, right?
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
so it is, and so what they were looking at was patient flow, which is incredibly important, right? In the hospital, right? And so my vision of it is more the literal, and actually I like the way that you described it, right? Because it is kind of unfortunate what's going on in aviation right now, especially in the context of what we're talking about, because for the longest time aviation has been held up as a highly reliable organization. I came from that, right? I know what the discipline is in there, and I can almost sense, the kind of things that might be going on with them, right? They were down for 90 seconds.
Yeah,
And, that's not, to us, that doesn't seem like, right? But imagine, driving your car and closing your eyes, right? So I think that's kind of the feeling. But what's happened is that they've created this incredible amount of automation and telemetry and information that gets all fed into this central systems with human in the loop. That means that there's so much dependency on that 90 seconds can become extremely important, right? So I mean, to me, I celebrate to a degree the amount of automation that they poured into air traffic control, right? And what they're able to do, because one of the big things to think about is what they've done in the period of time, certainly when I was in the FAA all the way until now, is they've increased the throughput on the airplanes that are out in that space, and they've been able to do that and do that safely because of their systems are highly reliable systems. But that what that does is it creates such a narrow margin for error, right?
right.
So that's where the fact that these systems are highly capable, the highly reliable thing becomes incredibly important as well. So kind of going back to the care traffic control, I envision very much like that, kind of a control center, right? And so, this is even kind of this is what we're talking about in the book, and allegiance, right? So you kind of start where we started, where you have a transport dispatcher that's able to see what's going on And because they have situational awareness, they have communications, they have the things that a controller has. But think about what you could do if you can create more and more of that situational awareness to other workflows that are mobile inside the building and have that communication and kind of drive that throughput. So when we're thinking about how we advance, it's interesting, especially when we were writing the book, we're looking at all of these. But I'll do right now is I'll step into the definition because I think that informs kind of where we're going with this. But the definition we created in the book is situational awareness and automation applied to optimize mobile workflows throughout the healthcare enterprise. Okay, so that's kind of the intention. That's all what's packed into there, right? So, and I kind of, when I explain, I like to kind of divide it up into situational awareness and automation, thinking, the automation is the technology and the situational awareness is more applied to humans in the loop, right? So, on the situational awareness side, you have this idea of these dispatchers. You give them more and more technology to increase the situational awareness, and they can be expanded, right, to all these services. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about that,
Yeah.
Paul, because I'm really curious your take on this. Because I think when people think about dispatchers and when they think about, a command center or a control center, and the complexities around healthcare operations and the location of everything, I think that's untenable. How do you measure all of it at once and actually have an impact to what's going on in real time to be able to improve things? And I think you mentioned something about AI, and that's part of where my head goes in terms of a
Right.
solution. But today it's possible too without some of the sophisticated AI. I'd be curious for you to help our audience understand exactly what that looks like in real life.
Right. And so, what we're doing, and even your thought process on this is that you're looking at healthcare right now, right? And your feeling is that it's untenable. If we removed all that technology and everything that they've done to create situational awareness and air traffic control, you'd say the exact same thing, right?
Yeah,
There's no
that's a
way,
good point. Yes.
right? There's no way you can do that, right? So, but think about the kind of things we're going to be able to do with some of these technologies. Again, we have location technologies, we have things that, like indoor GPS, we have the opportunity and the expansion and kind of this critical mass of enabling technologies. Wi-Fi is getting better, 5G. These things are going to get better and better. In this situation, it was when Apple actually in WWDC in San Francisco, when they announced Apple Indoor Positioning, they said we're bringing location indoors, right? And that was their announcement, and they showed this indoor GPS, and it's just your mind starts thinking about, well, if we can do that, we can do track and trace, we can, right? So maybe you already know enough about me to know where that what might happen with that, right? So but again, that's what we need to think about. Let's think about how we pace something like that toward that kind of that gold standard, right? Because I think if you can envision what we're trying to do is centralize enough of this communication, just like you're doing in in air traffic control, to allow the efficiencies to be expanded out in all these distributed services that are in the hospital, right? Because there's an incredible amount of delay. Well, the way that I've explained it is that obviously I come from aviation, but I've worked in other industries too, and I've worked in when we think about Industry 4.0, if people have heard about that, right? It's they call it the fourth industrial revolution, and everything we're talking about as far as the idea of indoor GPS, AI, IoT, all of these they're a part of that, right? They're a part of that industry, and it's going great guns now. That's why they, of course, call it the fourth industrial revolution. And then you think about healthcare, and healthcare is this thing they call the digital transformation. But there's really no, I don't see it. If somebody can help me with that, but I don't see like that roadmap or that Industry 4.0 idea in healthcare, because I think there is still that kind of connotation that that attitude that there's so much uncertainty that it's untenable. But you nailed it, right? You were talking about AI. It really does come down to, right, we can envision, and this is where agents are, this idea of agents gets interesting, right? Because we won't get too deep into it, but agents go through cycles of sensing and perceiving, thinking and deciding and acting and observing.
Yeah.
It's the idea of agency, right? So it's a loop, a cognitive loop, right?
Right.
And when we align that with technology, we know we can have sensors, we can have location sensing, we have indoor GPS. We can turn that into some sort of perception by adding some sort of context to it. It's a patient transporter, it's moving, right? And then you can use that information and a thinking, right, and to make decisions, and then to advance that to observing the decision, right? And that's what a dispatcher does with humans in the loop, right?
Yeah.
So what we've been working on is actually for creating this idea of agentic design, so that instead of building AI agents, right, you're focused on how do we take these workflows and construct them that way, and then find the placeholders for things like intelligence and where are the sensors and that, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about in the book. And then what you're doing is you're setting up kind of a scaffolding, right? So right now we could take and model the entire organization as agents, theoretically, right? Because we know that the people
Yeah.
are going to go through those cycles, the technologies go through those cycles, right? And then we're thinking, dreaming a little bit here, right? So if you could do something like that, right? You have kind of the as-is condition of the operational architecture of the right
Yeah.
of a
Define
hospital.
current state, right?
Yeah, you have a
Yeah.
current state, right?
Yeah.
Now, but you have it again. You have the scaffolding, right? And you know where it's required to have certain, observational things that are coming in to make decisions, right? To drive this efficiency. And then you start, you plug in the technologies as they start to advance along that. So that's really been my dream for this idea of care traffic control, is to, because the way that I look at it, again, we'll go back to the automation side of it, right? We talked a bit about the situational awareness side. You start with dispatchers, you advance, you co-locate them, they eventually end up, right? But they need the technology, they need that control room, they need the radars, they need all those kind of technologies. What's emerging, and we'll go back to Industry 4.0, is this idea of a digital twin, right? And we talked about, and I remember we asked, right? So we'll do the same thing. What do you think of when you hear digital twin?
Yeah. Well, I guess first going back to digital transformation and something you said there.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about the different health systems and what's happening in regards to digital transformation in healthcare, and it is progressing somewhat slowly, is what I would say,
Mm-hmm.
as the chief digital officer. We had a great podcast with Scott Arnold from Tampa General, and one of the things he pointed out is if you're not transforming, if you're not improving faster than your competition, you're done. You might as well hang it up because you're done. And I think there are health systems at all different levels today in terms of their willingness to innovate and to think differently. And this, what you're highlighting is something, define current state, what's going on. I love the description of all the different agents, because they're not AI agents, exactly as you pointed out. They're actual people operating, or systems operating within a health system. And
Right.
once you have an understanding for that, then it's a platform to improve, right? You can start to apply analytics. You can start to understand it. You can start to make small tweaks to it and see what the effects of those small tweaks are. So going back to your question, what do you think when you say digital twin?
Right.
You know, I've done a lot of work around population health, so I understand
Right.
a twin as defining a population and then taking an example of an individual in that population that needs some sort of care related to a chronic condition or otherwise, and being able to look at the different treatment protocols and apply them to their complex set of conditions that make them an individual, to see what would benefit them the most. So,
Right.
but really interested to hear, applying that to the work that you're doing, how you're defining a digital twin.
Right. Yeah. So working with the Digital Twin Consortium, and that's been very interesting. Again, because we wrote the book, and so what I wanted to understand more is what's the process for creating something, at that kind of scale, right? And so I'll use their definition. A digital twin is a virtual representation of a physical object or process that's synchronized with the real world at some specified frequency and fidelity. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's kind of a packed, right, definition, which is what you want out of an intentional definition, right? So the virtual representation, when we go back to allegiance, right, was this beautiful map with the that you could see, you could orient, right, you could do those kind of things. So you had a virtual representation there, and again, what I'm going to describe is a special, a certain kind, because we could, the idea is there's a lot of debate, of course, you can imagine in the Digital Twin Consortium around what is twinning, right? And what we're doing is we're creating an operational digital twin, right? So we're trying to twin the operations in, we'll say in a hospital, right? You could do that somewhere else, right? So you need the physical object is the building or the geography. Like if we expanded that out to multiple hospitals, and there's these, obviously there's a lot of mobile things that are going on that interconnect these hospitals, patients, and that kind of thing. Most certainly you can expand that geography. So now you have the virtual representation of that physical object in geography. Then going back to what we were talking about with agents, the virtual representation of the process is the agents, right, in the agency. And so, not that it's divorced from that. They work. Those guys are going to work together. The digital representation of the physical object, and then these agents obviously work together in order to create the situational awareness. And then under the agents, the way that I look at it is, it's almost like we were talking about our our model for an operational architecture in the as is. We can have agents that essentially mirror the organizational structure, right? So every role is operated as an agent. And then the other thing I like to bring up, and hopefully we aren't getting too deep, is this idea of planning horizons. And so when we think about an agent that's operating at this operational planning horizon, they're taking in the information that's necessary for them to make decisions in a shorter period of time,
Hmm.
right? So what it does, that allows us to kind of wrap constraints around the kind of things that agent needs in order to do its job. It's like, I need this information in this amount of time or I can't make a decision, right? You expand that up because we're talking about the organizational hierarchy. You can do that at tactical and strategic levels, but you can also, then those also can be represented as agents in that same construct. And again, people are still involved. It's human in the loop. But again, what we were talking about, the kind of thing that we're working on this right now, is that you can create a semantic representation of everything I'm talking about, and now you can show it to AI and say, how does this thing work?
Yeah.
Right? And we've done that, and it's kind of amazing, right? You could say, what happens when there's a stock out on of IV pumps on the fourth floor in such closet, right? And
Yeah.
if it,
I mean, that's incredible, and the potential is incredible,
incredible,
and I think people think it's far off,
right?
and it's not. I mean, I'm a big fan of a company called Palantir. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, and they're very involved with the military and strategic military operations and using AI to inform strategy on the battlefield. And
Right.
this is, you could do the exact same thing in a hospital. If you think of the hospital as your battlefield, it very much is. I mean, there's a lot
Yes.
happening. There's a lot of
It's chaotic, right? You're trying
right,
to
yeah,
organize the chaos. That's what
yeah.
you're always doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you've got
Yeah.
to try to understand what's going on and be able to change it and monitor it real time. So your description is great. Now with that much chaos going on, how do you manage it? How do you make it simpler?
Yeah.
And does it add to the chaos at first, having all this new information or?
I think that's such a great question because folks, when they start, to hear while we're going to introduce all this more technology, and again, this idea of the amount of uncertainty, that's where, we have this concept of an agent. We have a concept that, even when we were talking about agency, we know there are decisions that are necessary to be made. And those decisions, you can almost think of it as some sort of proportionality where the amount of uncertainty is matched to the amount of intelligence that's necessary for the agent to operate,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, love that.
So, and then you shift it the other way, we call it deterministic, right? So the more structure and rules based things, the more technology can operate in that agent, right? And so there, I mean, there's this. See, what I'm talking, everything I'm talking about has been proven in robotics, right? So when you think about, and this is one of the, I was even thinking about this today when we were knowing that we were going to have this discussion, the way that autonomous vehicles have advanced, and they use this structure, right, that I'm talking about, they most certainly set up that scaffolding and that human in the loop construct, right? So we started out, we had, we had cruise control, and then we had collision avoidance, and then we have autopilot, and we have all these pieces. But obviously, they've been thinking steps ahead, and they've been trying to create these systems so you can build trust, right? I see it the exact same way. Maybe that's the whole punchline to this whole thread that we're pulling on, is that when you do it incrementally and you do it the way that we're talking about, and you have agents and you have the understanding, you can incrementally build trust in the systems, and then you can allow them to advance, safely, right? That's where we come from, air traffic control, right? So that, but it's done with intentionality. You have this gold standard that, because again, we'll go back to the, like we have our operational architecture. We did it, we built it as agents. It's semantically represented. We can query it with AI. Now we have this new hospital, and in our book we created this hospital we called Edenvale, right? And right, and so and it was because in the book we were using a lot of concepts. You can see we're talking about a lot of concepts. We haven't really talked about any tangible. We talked about the company you were talking about, right? But but so how do you make those feel real? So what we did is we actually we created this fictional hospital. And it was kind of fun because in the beginning we talked about some of the things that we'd actually had happen in our hospitals. It was changing, the names to protect the innocent type things. And there's some crazy things. You've been there, right? You've been in the safety huddles, and that chaos, right? So we brought those to light. But then as we get later in the where we're talking about some of the more futuristic things in the command center, and we had we had some actual real personas and people names, and there's a fictional story, and you could kind of see how it related back to those, those things that are going to be less of a problem now because you have this feel for the way that this concept of command center in the Edenvale Hospital operates, right? But so I guess I can go back to that gold standard when you think about that semantic representation that we have of our hospital that it's the as is. There's no reason why we couldn't do that with Edenvale, right? With this amazing construct, and then again, if you can do this in quick turns, you can chop it up into bite-sized chunks and build trust along that path, and then allow those pieces to fit together, right?
Yeah,
that's the way I see it.
How big is Edenvale in the book?
It's about the size of Allegiance.
There you go.
No, but it's one hospital in the system, right? Yeah, and
yeah.
I don't, it's funny. Yeah, I don't even know that we really nailed down the size, right? It's probably more like Henry Ford Hospital because my vision was, and I was talk about this when I go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
I was going to say, you've been in these safety huddles before, right? And to me, they're I'm a technologist, so and my whole thing, like my journey was, I started in the hardware, and then I was the software. I wanted to get close to patient care. Right, that was what I felt like I wanted to do, and when I got the role at Henry Ford to operate the location-based services entity, I was allowed and invited to the safety huddles, and I would sit in there and I would hear what was going on, in a daily cycle in the hospital, and I was like, this should be 24/7.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be the COO, it doesn't need to be the chief nursing officers in there, but there should be eyes on this stuff. That was kind of and obviously they're flying blind. They don't have the technology yet, but that was kind of where I saw, kind of that kind of, aha, this is a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did some really innovative stuff back then. I remember a lot of it, and that it was a lot of fun. And what has occurred to me through this conversation, some of the challenges that we had during COVID, and how this sort of system could have solved the problems, and it was down to supplies as well. How many masks do you have? And I remember being on one of those safety calls, and them saying, we have masks. Unfortunately, they're only the size small masks, and trying to get the larger size masks.
Right.
it's just like you're saying, it's all about understanding the resources at your disposal, where they
Right.
are, and situational awareness as to what you need in a particular area. And COVID amplified a lot of things for a lot of organizations in terms of how they execute,
Right.
analytics in particular, understanding the operations, the need to be able to use analytics to facilitate change versus just as a strategic dashboard that provides information.
Right.
And this topic in particular, it really would have benefited organizations to know where things are and how
Right.
to apply them to the operations that we're
Yeah.
always changing.
I've always thought of the idea of air traffic control as being in a that's the kind of thing that happens now. If there's some sort of, I think they have provisions for some sort of command center to get set up in some sort of, in these emergency scenarios, right? But COVID is super interesting because of the idea that you remember the whole operations of the hospital changed because certain services weren't happening anymore, right? And now people were freed up, and then there was needs in other areas, so there was all this shuffle of talent around the building. You had nurses that were helping out environmental services. You had all these things that were going on that were just like you said, this incredible amount of change. Well, now if you think you had, about having what we were talking about, even that representation of these agents that will allow you to more easily change the human in that part, because all the rest of it, is abstracted and there's a semantic representation. It seems to me, just like you said, it's a wonderful opportunity to apply it to something like that where you need that rapid change.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, what is the book called again?
It's called Where Matters.
And is it out now or is it coming out?
So it's coming out in July. It's out for pre-order right now. If you put in Paul Zieske and Where Matters, you'll see it
Excellent.
for sure. And yeah, and it's one of those things that you write and you don't, it isn't like you're going to stop learning. And it isn't that I wouldn't go so far as to say that the book is at any point, not relevant at this point, but it's one of we're on to what's going to be in the second edition, right? With some of the things that we're talking about with agents, and the things that are going on in AI right now. AI is so interesting because you think about it's moving at such a velocity, and then while you're paying attention to that, you have to pay attention to the people and the learning that's going on,
Hmm.
right? Like how do people just like we were talking about, you nailed it when you were talking, you made an important distinction between agentic and agents, right? And so we think of agents as these things that maybe some assistive agents that's on a phone, it's a thing, right? It's a noun. Agentic is different. It's an adjective. It describes how you do things. So it's the same
Absolutely.
thing. When I talk, I think it's more important for people to think, to learn how to think about AI than learn specifically about how AI works. You know what I mean? And because people get very focused on LLMs and generative AI, not forgetting that that AI again is much broader than that, and there's going to be, as much as it's great to be able to talk to something and have it give you back intelligent responses, there's going to be control mechanisms that are going to be established that have nothing directly to do with generative AI, right?
Hmm.
And so that's why I think agents kind of adds that layer of abstraction, so if people can understand how agents operate, then they go deeper into that, and then at some point it's less important what algorithms are involved, or if it's Gen AI or some other thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in particular, when you start mixing some of the predictive AI out there with
Hmm.
some of the agentic AI, those are the two. I'd be curious. Those are the two primary that I see in this, location services space.
Hmm.
And when you look at LLMs, do they play a part when you look at generative AI? How do you see that? playing a part in some of the work that you're doing.
Right. So again, the generative AI is people may have heard, and we'll introduce it anyway. It's called RAG, right?
Okay.
So it's retrieval augmented generation. And what that allows the LLM to do is that you're less reliant on the large language model, but you're more reliant on its ability to be able to understand what it's retrieving. Okay, but it's still the
Okay.
exact.
Explain that. Go deeper on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So RAG, what it does is, and if you're using some of the tools like, if you're using some tools like ChatGPT and Claude out there, what they allow you to be able to do is to feed it something, like a book. You could I've actually put my book in there,
Mhm.
right? And now when you ask the questions, the first thing it's going to do is favor what you've taught it, what you've fed it, right? You ask it a question, first thing it's going to do, it's going to say, this must be important, so it goes to that. So you're going to get less hallucinations when you're asking it something that, goes in that direction. So what we've done with this product I've been working on is that we've created that semantic representation of these workflows. We tie it to the LLM, and then, like I was explaining, then we can ask it questions, right? But in
Gotcha.
the same,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, but in the early phases, there's no control loops, right? That are relying on the AI. All you're doing is you're trying to understand how the model works,
Yeah. And
right?
monitoring. Yeah.
Yep,
Hmm.
exactly, right? So, and I kind of look at it this way. I look at it, first we're going to model, right? And then by modeling, we're going to create the semantic representation of these agents. And by semantic representation, all we mean is that we're coming up with a structured way to represent the way that these agents operate and work, and
Hmm.
into some respect, think. That's the modeling. Then when we can put data, right, real data. So you have this. You can take the data from the real world. We're back to digital twins, right? You can feed that in, and now it not only understands how the workflows operate, from the modeling phase, but now it can actually have that context when it's looking at the data that's happening in the real world. But you're just monitoring, right? And then if we even think about playing around, we call it modifying.
Hmm.
Eventually, now we can have control loops, and we built trust. We're switching in we're swapping out the intelligence for some aspects of human components of this human in the loop, right? And then we're allowing the AI, to participate in modifying what's going on in the real world.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
great description. Absolutely.
yeah.
Paul, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to cover today?
No,
Um,
this was great. I've been doing a few of these, and a lot of times we're talking about things like the kind of the here and now with location-based services, and how to move those forward. It's still a passion of mine, but it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of step into the future a little bit, and hopefully, that future becomes real in a shorter period of time with podcasts like these.
yeah, absolutely. And our goal is to highlight some of the excellent work that's being done on that future of healthcare and applying information technology and your career and everything you've worked on. It really highlights an opportunity that I think a lot of health systems aren't aware of, that they aren't taking advantage of, and it's going to be uh, um, amazingly impactful as technology develops, as AI develops, as you start to be able to model some of these systems of operations and be able to, predict what will happen based on change. I mean, all the things that you've talked about today are are where improvement in healthcare can be made. I mean, it's exciting. I love talking to you. You're obviously passionate about this stuff, and your work is exciting. I can't wait to read the book. And you've got a newsletter that you publish as
I do,
well. Is that
yeah.
right?
The
Yeah.
newsletter is Why Where Matters, right? And it's just whywherematters.com. You can sign up there. We have a weekly snapshots into some of the things, most certainly some of the things that we talked about now, but a lot of more contemporary pieces to this. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today
All right.
and sharing your story and how you're impacting healthcare. I appreciate
100%.
it.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.